Greetings! On the last episode of Creating Your Own Campaign, we talked about how to focus on a villain or antagonist and how they might oppose your party, as well as how to get some of your players to create characters that actually fit into your setting. This episode will cover about how to go about creating the story structure of the campaign that you're making.
So what do I mean when I say that you need a story structure for your campaign? Why can't you just flip to a page in the monster manual earlier that day and decide,
yep, that's what my players are gonna fight. That seems really fun. I'm throwing it in right now.
Why can't you just improvise on the spot, and why do you have to prepare stuff in advance? The short answer is you technically don't. You see, if you're the DM and you sit down with your players for like a session 0 or before the game starts and you make them know that you're just trying to make cool fights happen, no big overarching story, or you're just improvising every session with no preparation, and they're perfectly fine with it and telling you that, yep, we would love to play that, then you do that. The number one rule for D&D is to have fun as a group. And if you can accomplish that with not having to prepare, you can do what most people can't. Go ham, fam. I'm glad for you. However, most people are not capable of doing that, including me. And this series is about how to create your own campaign, which implies that there's a level of effort being put into the story. The story can be either tailored to revolve completely around your players, or it can be structured kind of like the campaign books that the Wizards of the Coast publish. Either way, there's going to be a larger focus on the narrative goals that you have in mind that you want your players to be a part of. So when I say story structure, I mean that you as the DM have a general idea for how your campaign is meant to play out. And a nifty way of thinking about this is that a completed written module that everyone has played through is a house. The story is done. And a story structure is the scaffolding put up before a team really starts to build the house. You want to have an idea in mind, have a loose idea for what the structure should look like, but the building of the campaign should be accomplished in tandem with your players at the table. Now, I want to make this bit very clear. A story structure is not a completed railroad-style game. Your players will always surprise you, so preparing 10 sessions ahead isn't a great idea. But knowing the different allies, enemies, and events that will eventually affect your party is important. A good example of what I'm talking about can be found on page 17 of Storm King's Thunder. It functions like a flowchart and tells you what potential paths your players should be taking if they're playing the campaign. It also gives the levels that each player should be for these sections, and when the book is broken up into specific chapters, with each portion of the flowchart theoretically tells you how that chapter should play out. This does not mean that you have to stick to a stringent railroad where player agency means nothing, but it does allow you to plan your campaign more effectively. It allows you to tease late game content earlier, to tell a concise story that avoids feeling directionlessness, and it helps you to find and implement your players' backstories in the main story more easily if you know the basic structure that you want your campaign to take. So how do we start writing a story structure? Well, we already have the villain in mind for our players, the green hag that we decided upon in the last video. So what else do we need next? Before we jump into writing up a story that our players will be playing out, we should decide on a theme that you want your players to experience. And I'm not talking about the setting motif like space, exploration, fantasy, western, space cowboys. I'm talking about how your story will be told and experienced. Is your campaign meant to be a murder mystery where your players are hired to solve the murder of a public official? Is it meant to be a revenge story where your players are hunting down a serial killer who murdered a close friend of the party? Or is it meant to be any other number of things like horror, dungeon crawls, mythology-based retellings, or just an old-fashioned fantasy story that you're making for fun to fight a dragon? Regardless of what you're choosing, it's important to figure out the theme of your story so that you can relay that information to your players so they can create suitable characters for the campaign and so that you can create your story structure efficiently. It's also worth noting that you can have more than one theme in your campaign. Just because you have a main overarching theme, maybe it's horror, in your campaign, it doesn't mean that you can't switch up how specific sections or chapters are themed. You can play Curse of Strahd, which is a strong horror mystery theme, and still switch themes for certain chapters, like going into Strahd's castle early, which can be played as a dungeon crawl stealth mission. Likewise, your own campaign might be a survival hex crawl similar to Tomb of Annihilation's pre-Omu chapters that will then flex into a dungeon crawl. It's important to figure out which themes your players both find fun and fit the story that you want to tell, so that you and your players don't get campaign burnout. For this example, I'm deciding that we're going to do a horror mystery theme with hex crawl inspired survival travel. So we have our villainous green hag, and know that the campaign is going to be horror mystery themed. So the only thing we really have left to consider before making our story structure is what levels do we plan for this campaign to take place. So this is where things get really interesting, because the general consensus between people who've tried to DM campaigns in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is that once players begin to hit around level 13, the game becomes incredibly hard to balance. I don't necessarily agree that people say it's impossible to balance high-level campaigns, but it definitely does become harder. It becomes so difficult because full casters gain access to their 7th level spells, which are undoubtedly just busted. They break the game usually. So these are incredibly powerful and allow the party to cheese high-level encounters that you might have set up with spell combos. Things like Force Cage and Hunger of Hadar, or casting Simulacrum when the player has an 8th level spell slot, and then having the Simulacrum continue to cast Simulacrum with the 7th level spell slot that it would have to have infinite Simulacrum copies of yourself. What you should take away from this is that the higher level the players are, the harder it will be as the DM to balance encounters in a fun and meaningful way. On the opposite end of this spectrum, modules published by Wizards of the Coast often have entry segments that aren't even directly related to the campaign in order to level up the party prior to the main campaign starting. A couple examples of these are the Death House in Curse of Strahd, or the Goblin Caves in Storm King's Thunder. These segments are meant to quickly level up parties before the main story because of how easy it is for players to die at low levels, and balancing the campaign at this point is somewhat difficult. For these reasons, this campaign will be designed to be run from levels 3 to 9. Starting the campaign at level 3 allows characters to choose what kind of build they want their character to go into, since all classes will have access to their subclass by level 3. It also adds a bit of survivability and flavor to each player's class and character, since they'll have a few more hit dice and more class features to use by that point. The campaign will end by level 9 because first-time DMs will find that this is a level where players begin to feel
unkillable unless I am trying to TPK.
The player characters should be capable of overcoming nearly any encounter if they come across it while thinking carefully and playing well, and their dice RNG isn't just abysmal. This means that as a DM, you can throw high concept and difficult fights at your players so that they feel as though that they're earning their hard-fought victory. It may seem implausible, but with the proper build-up, players can accomplish victories that stick with them and may seem impossible at first. You defeat an ancient blue dragon in Storm King's Thunder by level 10, and taking on the Demon Lords at levels 13 to 15 and Out of the Abyss. Both seem like they're impossible odds for the players, but the build-up and battle for your players make it both memorable and all the more satisfying when they do succeed. It essentially boils down to what you think will work. At what level do you think your finale will be trivial? And at what level do you think you're no longer able to balance your campaign in a fun way? With experience comes knowledge about how to handle higher level parties and how your players tend to respond to situations. So long as everyone's still having fun, you're balancing your game correctly. So, here's an example story structure for the campaign that we are making. We have a very loose idea of how we want our campaign to play out. Level 3 involves the hook and information that lays the groundwork for the theme of the campaign. The players find themselves in a secluded forest, where a few settlements have resided for the last few years, and they have called for help due to a worrying amount of disappearances. The forest was once known to be the home of a green dragon, but in years past, adventurers have long since slain the beast for their locals. Players can be the intended investigators or just heroes in the right place at the right time. Whatever backstory they want to fit into the campaign can work. Level 4 will have the players tasked with searching for one of the oldest residents in the forests, an old hunter who lives in seclusion who rarely stops by the town. He apparently knows a lot about the local area, and the mayor who hired the players will ask them to seek him out to see if he knows anything. Level 5 will involve assisting the old hunter in cleansing a desecrated sacred grove. He believes that someone, or something, has corrupted the grove to turn the very forest against its inhabitants. This section should end with the grove being cleansed by the old hunter while the party defends him from waves of blights. After the grove has been cleansed, players should also have learned that none of the missing people appear to have been brought to the grove, and the grove was corrupted by very powerful magic. Level 6 should involve delving deeper into the forest at the mention of the Green Dragon's old lair and current grave. As the DM, you should probably allude to the fact that a great number of the beasts and blights seem to grow in number and ferocity the closer one gets to the heart of the forest and grave. When players finally arrive at the Green Dragon's grave, they find that 3 green hags, Gragthos' daughters, seem to have been casting some kind of ritual. And once the coven has been defeated and the party begins to leave, the dragon will be reborn as an adult green Dracolich under Gragthos' control. Players who inspect the area would find the corpses of all the missing people, including the mayor of the town within the grave. Once players arrive back in town, Gragthos will reveal herself as the Green Hag to the party and the townsfolk. She will then escape the town on the back of the Dracolich now under her control, while threatening anyone who attempts to leave the forest with death. Level 7 should involve either fortifying or abandoning the town as players attempt to evacuate or protect civilians from an onslaught of beasts and monstrosities. Giant spiders, swarms, possessed wildlife, even treants, these can all be used as different minions that pose different unique threats to a small forest town. The focus of this chapter should be on getting the townsfolk to ask the players for help as they fear things will only get worse, seeing as how brazen Gragthos has become. Level 8 is an interesting chapter as it can technically be skipped. The purpose of this chapter is to get the players to attempt to travel to different parts of the forest that they have visited before or that they think could be of use to them in order to rally a force that can rival Gragthos' corruption. Possible places the players could visit are the Old Hunter Secluded Hut, the Cleansed Sacred Grove, the Fortified Town, or any other number of side quest areas you've thrown into your own hex crawl to pad your forest and implement player backstories. Once players have gathered what they believe to be enough forces to take on Gragthos and her new pet Dracolich, they can begin the finale, the final chapter. Level 9 should include the travel back to the Green Dragon's gravesite. This should be a grind against a variety of the Hag's minions that players have experienced thus far. The day of the final encounter, players should find very minimal, but still some resistance as the forest grows quieter and quieter the closer to the heart they venture. It's good to make sure that players aren't fighting your big bad with 0 other encounters during the same day, since players can burn through every one of their resources to make the fight feel like a stomp that is anticlimactic. You want your players to feel as though their final battle with Gragthos and her Dracolich was fun, hard, and a well-earned victory, or else they'll feel like the rest of the campaign just was hollow, that it was just a gimme the whole time, that this was a pushover campaign. This chapter should feel tense and push your players to their limits as it's the conclusion to the story. Ultimately, this is how you should start with a story structure. You should have one that gives a general idea to how you want your campaign to run so that you can plan and foreshadow story elements more effectively, and so that you can better implement your players' backstories into the campaign after session 0. And that's really all I mean by having a story structure for your own campaign. I hope you found this video interesting and insightful, and if you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me that you guys are enjoying the series. I'll see you later. Have a wonderful day. You know, guys, I'm getting real tired of only getting to DM in D&D. Sometimes I just want to play too. So I think it's time I pass the torch to some new DMs. You need a story structure that's real nice, utilizing some literary device. I'm coming out, blasting on my main mic, talking about villains and themes and leveling up right. I'm the ugly duckling, ain't asked for nothing, but I'm straight spitting facts about D&D 5th edition. Don't just believe me, go test it, it's easy, my ugly ducklings. I don't want to forever DM no more, guys. No, really, it's not that fun. It's good every once in a while, but every time, I need more DMs. We're in a DM shortage. Why don't we just rotate who's DMing like each session, guys? Guys, come on, guys. I need more DMs. Please. Please.